Good day, grade 11 learners. Welcome to Life Sciences lesson. My name is Ntombi Dladla. This lesson is brought to you by Sci-Bono Discovery Center in collaboration with Gauteng Department of Education. Let's quickly look at it. Hi, grade 11s. Today's topic is biodiversity of plants. Now, let's check. Plants are classified or are divided into four main groups. The first one being the Bryophytes, the second one, the Pteridophytes, the third one, the Gymnosperms, and the last one, which are the Angiosperms. Now, before we can get into the plant biodiversity itself, we need to know what are the phylogenetic trees. What are we really talking about when you talk of the phylogenetic trees or the cladogram? But we prefer the phylogenetic tree over the cladogram. Phylogenetic tree is the scientific word. Now, what are we talking about when we talk of the phylogenetic tree? We need to know that there is evolution in all the living organisms. Now, what are we talking about when we talk of evolution? Evolution is said to be the gradual process that causes changes in the characteristics of a population across many successive generations. In other words, evolution means a gradual change of organisms over a long period of time. Now, the phylogenetic tree is a branching diagram which shows that the evolutionary there is evolutionary relationship between the organisms. Now, organisms, it means that organisms that we see now, they are the descendants of the organisms which lived in the past, but they do look different because organisms change over a period of time. Now, let us look into this example of a phylogenetic tree. We are having group E, which is said to be a common ancestor. Now, a common ancestor, that's where all of these descendants have been evolved from. The descendant Group D, Group A, Group B, and Group C. So this is a typical example of a phylogenetic tree. Now, when we talk of a common ancestor, we are simply referring to the organisms that appeared first, and then after these organisms which appeared first, and now they give rise to all of these new organisms. Now, let us break down the terminology, which is phylogenetic tree. Phylum means organisms, phylum, a group. And then genetic means the genes or the relationship between the genes. So this is how phylogenetic has been broken down into, with the phylum meaning that the organisms, phylum, group, and then the genetic, which means the genes or the relationship between the organisms. Now, let us look into this example of a phylogenetic tree. The lines of the phylogenetic tree shows the lines of descendants. In other words, these lines are the lines of descendants. Now, let us look into this one. The group A, B, and C, they are all the descendants of the common ancestor, which is group group E. And then what is happening? Group E gave rise to groups A and D. In other words, group E gave rise to these organisms and those organisms, whereas group D gave rise to group B and group C organisms. Now, in other words, group B and group C are closely related because these are the descendants, the immediate descendants of group D. That's why they are closely related. And then when we look into Group A and Group B. Group A and Group B, they are not closely related because they are not from the same from the same group or from the same ancestor. So that's why we are having the ones which are closely related and the ones which are not closely related. Now let us check into this evolution of plants. We are having the common ancestor here. These are the common ancestor, and then the first descendants were then the bryophytes, and then the bryophytes are said to be the non-vascular plants. And then when we talk of the non-vascular plants, we are simply talking about organisms which do not have true root stems and leaves. Where at the same time, we've got now the pteridophytes, which are also the descendants of what? Of these common ancestors. And these pteridophytes are said to be the vascular plants. And then when we talk of the vascular plants, we are simply talking about the plants which are having true root stems and leaves. In other words, they do have the conducting tissues. And then we also the third descendant will be the gymnosperms, and then the gymnosperms are the pollen. They bear pollen as well as the naked seeds. And then the last one will be the angiosperms, and then angiosperms are flowering plants. In other words, they give rise to flowers as well rise to to the fruits. Now, let's quickly look into the possible questions which may rise when we are asked about the phylogenetic trees. Now, we are given this phylogenetic tree, and then the questions are based on this phylogenetic tree. The first question says, which number represents number 1 or number A, which represents the common ancestor for all the present day species in the phylogenetic tree? In other words, which number represent all these present organisms? And then the answer will be, therefore, it will be number 1, because this is our common ancestor. The second question on this diagram says the common ancestor for species A and B. Which number represents the common ancestor for species A as well as species B? So which one is the common ancestor for species A as well as species B? So these are the descendants of what? Of that common ancestor, which is number 3. So can you see it's so simple to answer these questions. Now let's move forward. The third question, still based on the diagram here, is species, excuse us, there's S missing them. Is species A more closely to species B or C? Is species A more closely to B or C? Which one of the organisms or which one of the species are more closely to species A? That is very, very simple. Both A and B are coming from what? From the common ancestor. So the answer will be B. Species B is more closely to species A as compared to species B. Explain your answer in question 3. Why are we saying so? Why are we saying A and B are closely related as compared to what? To D, I mean to E. It is because A and B are sharing what? Are sharing the common ancestor. They are having the same, they share more recent what? Common ancestor than what? Than species A. So this is how we are supposed to do what? To answer all the questions which are based on the phylogenetic tree. So let us now get to the business of the day. The first division of our plants we said is what? Is the bryophytes. Now we need to know what exactly are bryophytes. Bryophytes are mostly primitive terrestrial plants. Now we all know by now that when we talk of terrestrial organisms or terrestrial plants, we are simply talking about plants which are well suitable to grow on what? On land. And then the division of bryophytes includes the mosses, the liverworts, as well as the hornworts. So these are all the examples of what? Of plants which fall under what? Under the division of bryophytes. Now the most common example of bryophytes are the what? Are the mosses, and then they are usually found on damp and shady areas. So in other words, they are a conducive environment for them to be able to grow well. It should be damp and what? And shady areas. And we know that where there's shade, always, because there's no sun that is coming through or that is penetrating on that, it means that that place or that area will always be damp. Now let us look now into the structure of what? Of the bryophytes, or into the structure of a bryophyte. A bryophyte is made up of two generations. It is made up of two generations. The first generation is the sporophyte generation, and the second generation is our gametophyte generation. And then the gametophyte generation is said to be the dominant generation. In other words, this is the generation that overpowers the other generation. In other words, sporophyte is more dominant over what? Gametophyte is more dominant over what? Over sporophyte. And then the gametophyte generation is made up of the leaves, and then the leaves are not the true leaves, and they are referred to as the leaflets. And then it is also made up of what? Of the stem, as well as the stem is not the true stem. And then lastly, they are made up of what? Of the rhizoids. The rhizoids are the false what? Are the false roots. In other words, instead of them having the roots, they rather have what? The rhizoids. So rhizoids are the false roots. And then as of the second generation, which is the sporophyte is made up of the foot. The foot is somewhere here. It is the one that attaches the first, the sporophyte generation into the gametophyte generation. So we'll be having the foot there, which is usually the base of what? Of the sporophyte generation. And then the foot gives rise to the this part, which is called what? The seta. And then the seta upholds the capsule. This is our capsule or sporangium. Other textbooks will be talking of what? Of the sporangium. So this is a capsule or the sporangium. And then the opening of the capsule or the opening of the sporangium is covered or is enclosed by the operculum. And then other textbooks are using a terminology calyptra instead of what? Of operculum. So when we talk of operculum, we are talking about the part which covers what? The opening of the capsule. Now inside the capsule, that's where spores are developing. So that is why it is also referred to as what? As a sporangium. So when we look into this picture, this is where we clearly see the two generations. The gametophyte generation, which is made up of leaves. The most visible part will be the leaves there, as well as the second part, which is the sporophyte generation. Now let us look now into the general characteristics of what? Of the bryophytes. Bryophytes are generally small. They are even smaller. They are less than they are small, and they are greater than what? 20 centimeters in size. And then they do not have true roots, true stems, or true leaves. This is what I've just explained, that instead of leaves, they've got the false leaves, they've got the false stems, and then instead of roots, they've got what? The rhizoids. So because of that, the plant is referred to as what? As a thallus plant. Thallus plant is a plant that does not have true roots, stems, and leaves. So that's why this is said to be a thallus plant. Now, water can be absorbed directly through the leaves. In other words, the leaves can absorb what? Water directly. And why? It is because the leaves of the bryophytes, or the leaves of the what? Of the moss, are not protected or covered by what? By waxy cuticles. So it is very, very simple for them to do what? To absorb water. And then lastly, the leaves are not true leaves. I've explained that they are not true leaves, and then they are always referred to as the what? As them leaflets. So this is the full structure of what? Of a moss plant. Now, the other characteristic is that mosses do not have what? They do not have the vascular tissues. In other words, the vascular tissues are not present in mosses. It means that they do not have xylem. They do not even have what? Phloem. In other words, they do not have all these two conductive tissues. So that's why they are referred to as what? As non-vascular plants or non-vascular tissues, because the xylem and phloem are not present. Now, when we look into the still continuing with the characteristics of the moss, it is that the rhizoids are at the base of the plants. When we look into the rhizoids, remember I said the rhizoids are the false roots. So we know that most of the plants, their roots are at the base of the what? Of the body plant. Now the rhizoids are at the base of the what? Of the roots or of the plant. Why are they at the base? So that they can anchor the plant firmly on the what? On the substrate. Remember, the general functions of what? Of the roots is to do what? Is to anchor the plant firmly on the what? On the soil, so that the plant remains firm, so that the plant remains upright, straight, because of what? Because of the roots. So the other function of the rhizoids is to do what? It helps them to do what? To absorb all the what? The nutrients from what? From the substrate. And then remember that they are not the true roots. The rhizoids are not the true roots. Now, how does reproduction take place in the bryophytes? Remember, we said that the plant or the moss is made up of two generations, the gametophyte generation as well as the sporophyte generation, meaning that the bryophytes can reproduce asexually. And how asexually? By means of spores, and then they can also reproduce sexually by fusion of what? Of gametes. Now, what is happening now with the life cycle of the bryophytes? There is that alternation of what? Of generation that is taking place. Now, what is happening? I said earlier on that the gametophyte generation is the dominant generation, and then it changes. It has what? It has the leaves, and then on the leaves, that's where we've got what? That's where we've got the male branches, and then there's also what? The female branches. And when we look into the leaves, into these leaves, they are green, and we know that when plants are green, it means that they are capable of doing what? Of photosynthesizing. It means that they can photosynthesize. These plants can be able to make their own food. Now, sperm cells and egg cells are produced on the what? On the male and female branches. I've just said it now that on the plants, on the gametophyte plants, there are branches which are said to be the female branches. In other words, the female branches, that's where the female gametes are produced. And then we'll be having what? The male branches. And then on the male branches, that's where the male reproductive organs are going to be produced. And then when we look into this plant, it shows us nicely the two generations. So this will be the first generation, which is the gametophyte generation, and followed by the second generation, which is the sporophyte generation. Now, spores are produced in the sporophyte generation. Why are they produced in the sporophyte generation? It is because on the sporophyte generation, that's where we are having the sporangium. Remember, there's sporangium, or the capsule. And then what is inside the capsule? Inside the capsule, that's where there are spores. So in other words, spores are stored inside the what? The sporangium or the capsule. So what is happening now, when these spores, which are inside the sporangium or capsule, when they mature, the sporangium ruptures, and then the calyptra or the calyptra or the operculum opens up, and then what is going to happen with the spores? The spores now will start to do what? They will be released, and then when they are released, they will be dispersed by what? By wind. In other words, these spores will now end up where? On the substrate. So what is going to happen? These spores are now going to do what? The spores are going to germinate and form what we call to form the second what? The second generation. And then when they germinate, now they form the what? They start to form the second generation, which is the gametophyte generation. And then what is going to happen? The gametophyte generation is going to it has what? It has the male branches which and the female branches. Now the male branches, what is going to happen? Through water, when this part is covered by water, they will then release what? They will then release the sperm cells. And then the sperm cells will swim because of water. They will swim into what? They will swim into the female branches, whereby they will fuse. The sperm cell will fuse now with what? It will fuse with an egg cell, which is inside the what? Which is inside the female branch. And then this fertilized egg will now develop into what? Will develop into the second phase, which is what now? Which is the sporophyte. So it will develop into the second phase, which is sporophyte. And then the sporophyte, remember, it has that foot, and then the foot will attach itself on the gametophyte generation. And then we've got the foot, we've got the seta, we've got the sporangium, and then with the what? With the operculum, which protects the head or the opening of the capsule. So, and then at the end of the day, we'll be having what? We'll be having the complete bryophyte or the complete moss. Now, what is happening with the moss is that moss do not bear fruits. They also don't bear seeds, or they do not produce fruits, and then they also do not produce what? Seeds. And then we can see very clearly that water is very, very essential for reproduction in the bryophytes. Why? So that the sperm cells can be able to do what? To swim from the male gamete to get into the female gamete, where fertilization will take place. Now let us look into the life cycle of bryophyte with that alternating generations. Let's start here with what? With the sporophyte generation. Remember this, the sporophyte, this is the sporophyte generation. The sporophyte has the seta, it has the sporangium. Inside the sporangium are the spores. So what is happening when the spores mature? What is happening with the what? With the operculum? It opens up, and then it will release what? All these spores, and then the spores will be dispersed by what? By wind. And then these are our spores, and then after they've been dispersed by the wind, and then the spores now, they start to do what? They start to form now. They mature, they grow into what? They grow into the gametophyte. And what is happening with the gametophyte generation? The gametophyte generation has the male branches as well as the female branches. So what is happening inside the male branches? Inside the male branches, that's where the sperm cells are produced, and then the sperm cells, they will now start to do what? They will start to swim via water. Remember, I just said that water is essential for what? For fertilization in bryophytes. So the water will enable the sperm cells to do what? To swim. Where are they going to? Where are they swimming to? They are swimming now into the what? Into the female gametophyte. What is inside the female gametophyte? There's an egg cell or there's an ovum. So there will be now fusion of these sperm cells and that egg cell. So this sperm cell fuses with what now? With the egg cell. And then what process is called? This process is called fertilization. Fertilization is when the sperm cell fuses with the egg cell, and then the process is called fertilization. And then the fertilized ovum develops now into an embryo, and then from an embryo it develops into a zygote. The zygote now develops into the gametophyte, and then the gametophyte will be attached to the what? To the sporophyte generation. Then we are having a full bryophyte. So this is how alternation of generation is taking place, or the reproduction. So here is asexual, also by means of spores, and here is sexual, also by means of fusion of what? Of gametes. Now let's now quickly look into the questions based on the bryophytes. Look at the diagram of a moss plant below and answer the questions that follow. So this is a moss plant, and then the first question says, to which division does this plant belong? To which division does a moss plant belong? It belongs to the bryophyte. Which is the plant body called thallus? Which plant body is called thallus? Here in the why is the plant body called thallus? It is called thallus because it does not have true roots. It does not have true roots, it does not have true stems, and it does not have true leaves. That's why it is called a thallus body. What are the structures called that anchor the plants? What are the structures called that anchor the plant? Those structures are called the rhizoids, not the roots. Remember, grade 11s. Identify the generation labeled A. So generation labeled A, it starts from here and then it ends there. And you also need to identify generation labeled B. Generation labeled B is the one which has leaves. So generation labeled A is our sporophyte. And then the generation labeled B, the one which has branches of leaves, it is called the gametophyte generation. Now, question number 5. Why are moss plants usually found in damp areas? Why are they not? Why can't we find, or why can't we get moss plants on a very dry land? Why are they only found in damp areas? It is because moss do not have conducting tissues. Remember, the conducting tissues are the xylems and phloems, so they don't have those tissues. And then the leaves must absorb water directly. So that's why they should be on damp areas. And then moss needs water again for what? For fertilization. That's why they are in damp areas. So that is why it is more important to grow where there is water which is readily available. In other words, water should always be available. Number 1, for reproduction to take place. Number 2, for that water will be easily absorbed by what? By our leaves. So that's why. Now we move to the second division, grade 11s. The second division is called the pteridophyte. So we've got the silent P there. So we don't say pterito, but it's called pteridophytes. So let's quickly look into our pteridophytes. So the division of pteridophytes usually include ferns, and then there are approximately 12,000 different types or different species of what? Of ferns. In other words, we've got so many different species of ferns. I know the ferns that we usually see are the ferns that we have at our homes, but we've got about 12,000 different species of ferns. And then they range from in sizes from thin plants of only 1 centimeter in height to the tree ferns which can grow up to 25 meters in height. So they can be as small as 1 centimeter and as big as more than 25 meters in height. So most ferns require water. Most ferns require water. They also need a damp and shady habitat. It is not that much different from the previous division. In other words, the environment which is conducive for ferns is almost the same with the environment of or the suitable conditions of of the bryophytes. So these are different species of of ferns. Now, ferns usually have true roots, true stems, and true leaves. In other words, ferns are not thallus. We cannot regard them as as thallus because they've got true roots, true stems, and true leaves. And then ferns' leaves are referred to as frond. So when we talk of the fern leaves, we are simply talking about what? Fronds. They usually develop as tight coils, and then they start to unroll and expand as they grow. So let me quickly show you an example of the leaves of the fern. So this is how the leaves of the ferns look like. So the leaves of the ferns, we said that they are called, or they are referred to as what? As the frond. So it is said that the whole leaf with the blade and the stalk is called what? The frond. So this is our frond. This is the leaf. So this is an example of what? Of a leaf of the fern. So Now, when we check again on the structure of a fan, the leaves are attached on the rachis. So this stalk, it is called what? A rachis. So that's where the leaves are attached to. And then that's where we are going to have what? The leaf blades, which are growing or which are developing on the what? On the stalk. So the second part of the fan, that's where we are having now the what? The rhizoids. In other words, the rhizoids gives rise to what? To a leaf stalk. And then on the leaf stalk, that's where our leaves are going to develop. When we look into the stem is a rhizoid, and then the stem now will give rise to what? To the roots. So you can see here are the roots. So remember, we said it has the true stem, and then the name of the stem that is found on the fan plants is the rhizome. And then we've got the true leaves, and then we've got the true roots. So that's why we are not regarding it as a thallus plant. And then now when we look into the characteristics of the leaves, I mean of the fan, is that the leaves are covered by a waxy cuticle. And then we all know that the function of the waxy cuticle is to do what? Is to prevent loss of water. So when we look into these leaves, we can see that they are definitely covered or protected by what? By waxy cuticle, meaning that this waxy cuticle on our leaves is the one that is preventing what? The loss of water. And then secondly, the leaves are often divided into smaller leaflets, and then which are reducing the what? The surface area for what? For transpiration. So our leaves are often divided into smaller leaflets. When we check onto these leaflets, they are smaller. We don't get these big or huge leaflets. So they are divided into smaller leaflets or into smaller leaf blades. And then these now reduces what? The area for what? For transpiration, because of them being smaller. So the other thing about the leaves is that a leaf which is divided into smaller leaflets is called what? Is called a leaf compound. All the leaves which are divided into smaller leaflets are referred to as what? As the leaf compounds. And then what is happening with the stomata? The stomata is also present on the lower parts, on the lower sides of what? Of the leaves. So they are present on the lower sides of the leaves. So you can see them that they are smaller. They are divided into smaller branches. So that is it about the leaves. Grade 11s. Now, this gives us now the structure, the whole structure or the full structure of what? Of the fan plant. Now, when we check into the characteristics again of the fan plants, is that they do have what? Vascular tissues. By now, we know that when we talk of the vascular tissues, we are simply talking about the conducting tissues, which are the xylem as well as the phloem. In other words, the xylem will be able to do what? To transport water, and then the phloem will be able to transport what? Organic substances. So in other words, these two conducting tissues are present where in the fan plant. That's why fans are growing taller than what? They are growing taller than mosses. Why? Because mosses do not have all these two conductive tissues. And then they both have xylem phloem, which transport water, and they are able to transport also the photosynthetic products respectively. In other words, after this, all the water and all the photosynthetic products will reach all the parts of what? Of the fan plant. Now, stems of the fans usually grow horizontally, and then they usually grow horizontally, and then they are called the rhizomes. That's what I've spoken about earlier on. So what you need to know with the rhizome is that they are protected, or they are covered by a brown scale like leaves. So they've got that brown scale like leaf. our rhizomes, which is the stem. So they are protected by that. And then rhizomes cuts down on the water loss by being underground. They are always underground. You can see this is our soil, this is our soil. So they are usually underground and is covered by small brown scales. And then that is our rhizomes. And then on the rhizome, that's where the advantageous roots are developing. So we've got the advantageous roots. The advantageous roots are those scattered what roots? They are the scattered roots. So the advantageous roots are developing on the what? Are developing from the rhizome. So now I've already spoken about the advantageous roots which are developing from the rhizome, and then these are true roots. The advantageous roots, the roots that are developing from the rhizome, are true roots, and they are able now to do what? To absorb water from the what? They are able to absorb water for the plants. In other words, they are able to absorb water and mineral salts from the plant. And secondly, these roots are able to do what? To anchor plant family in the soil. In other words, these are true roots. They are anchoring this whole plant family in the soil. Now, when we check now the reproduction of the ferns, they reproduce asexually by means of what? Of spores. They can also reproduce sexually by means of what? Of fusion of gametes. Now, the asexual reproduction takes place on the sporophyte generation. Now, when we check the sporophyte generation, we said that the sporophyte generation is the dominant generation of what? Of our fern plant. And then on the sporophyte generation, that's when, again, let me quickly show you, that's when our spores are produced. And then where do the spores produce? Where are they produced? The spores are produced from the sporangia. And then where are the sporangia? The sporangia are arranged. Can you see at the back of the leaves? There are small spores there, which are called the what? The sorus. When you look into this leaflet, or when you look into this front, remember we said this is called the front. When you look into this front, you will clearly see that there are the sori, one sorus but many sori. So when you look into this leaflet, you will see many sori which are developing on the ventral part of what? On the ventral surface of our leaf. So inside the sori, that's where there is sporangium, and then that sporangium is the one that is containing, or is the one that has spores inside it. So I just want you to look closely into this structure of into this leaflet. This is where you can see our sorry, not sorry as in you are being apologetic, but the name is sorry, and then if they are in a singular form is a sorus. So one sorus but many sori. So these are the sorus which are the sori which are developing on the ventral surface of the leaf. And then inside this sori, that's where the sporangium is situated. And then the sporangium is the one that is going to contain what? The spores. And then the spores are the ones which are going to do what? To reproduce asexually. So let's this is how they look like. Now going back to our you've all seen the sorus or the sori, you've all seen them. So what is happening? The spores are produced inside the what? The sporangium, and then the sporangium is inside or develops inside the what? The sori. So they develop inside the what? The sori. This is how we write the sori. Do not write that apologetic sorry, not that sorry. Otherwise, if you meant to say this sorry and then you wrote this, you are going to get it wrong, because it gives us now a different meaning. So not that sorry, but this sorry. So inside the sori, that's where we are having the sporangium, and then the sporangium are producing the spores. So the very same thing is happening with what? With the the ferns. It is that they do not bear seeds or fruits. So they only bear what? Spores. So this is how the spores are being produced. They are inside the sporangium which is under the what? The sorry. So that's how it reproduces asexually on the sporophyte generation by means of what? By means of the spores. By means of the spores. So let's quickly look into the life cycle again of fans. There's also alternative of what? Alternating of generations. In other words, this generation alternates with the other generation. Remember, there are still two generations here. We still have the sporophyte generation and the gametophyte generation. Now, the sporophyte generation alternates with what? The gametophytes, and the gametophytes alternates with what? The sporophytes. Now, let's quickly look how it is happening. And then this is our the sporophyte generation. So on the sporophyte generation, remember we said it is the dominant phase. On the sporophyte generation, what is happening now? We'll be having the spores. And then what is happening with the spores? Remember, the spores are produced inside the sporangium. And then the sporangium is under the what? Is under the sorry. So the spores are now produced, and then they are released. And then as they are released, they develop into this structure, and then this structure develops again into what we call the young gametophyte. And then the young gametophyte is referred to as the prothallus. What is the prothallus? The prothallus is that heart-shaped structure of what? Of the gametophyte. So the prothallus is the part of the fan that has both male and female what? And female gametes. Now, the male gamete is called the antheridium. So the antheridium is on the what? On the prothallus, develops on the prothallus. And then the female gamete is called what? Is called the archegonium. So the archegonium develops again on the what? On the in the prothallus. And then there are now what? There are rhizoids which are developing on the prothallus. So this part now is our gametophyte generation. Remember, why are we saying is the gametophyte generation? Because it gives rise, or it releases gametes. What are the female gametes? The female gametes are the archegonium. And then what are the male gametes? The male gametes are the antheridium. What does the antheridium produce? It produces sperm. What does the archegonium produce? It produces the egg cell or the ovum. So these are the prothallus, and the prothallus is our gametophyte generation. So what is happening now? With the use of what? Of water. Water must be there. Why water is essential for fertilization, or why water is essential for asexual reproduction? It is because it enables now what? It will enable the sperm cells to do what? To swim. And then where are they going to? Where are they swimming to? They are swimming now from the antheridium, and then they are getting into what? They are swimming towards the archegonium. Remember, the archegonium is the female reproductive part. So they are swimming into the archegonium. And why so? So that these sperm cells can fuse with what now? With the egg cell, which is inside the archegonium. And that process, remember, is called what? Fertilization. And then after the fertilization has occurred, now this structure now develops into what we call zygote. And then zygote now starts on the what? Now on the second generation, which is the sporophyte generation. And then zygote develops now into what? It develops into the what? It develops into the young sporophyte. On the gametophyte, here are the roots now. The roots are starting to develop, and then the roots will be anchored. The roots are now being anchored in the soil, and then we end up having with what? We end up having the mature sporophyte. And then this is what we'll be seeing, which is our fern plant. And then the fern plant, as they mature, remember on the leaves there are sori. Then the sori are having what? The sori are having the sporangium, and then the sporangium will start to do what? To release the spores, and then the spores are being released, and then the cycle is going to be completed. And then this is how we get into the what? Into the mature sporophyte. So that is called the alternating of what? Of generations. Now let's quickly look into the questions which are based on the fern plant. Now look at the diagram below and answer questions that follow. This is the diagram, and then the diagram has A, B, C, and D. Now the first question says, give the letter of the structure representing the gametophyte. Which part is representing the gametophyte? Remember, we said the gametophyte generation is the one which has the male and female gametes, and then it has a heart-shaped structure. So the letter will be B. And then identify C. Identify C. What is C? You identify C, and then you state the name of the structure in which it is found. What is C, grade 11s? C, what is it? C is spore, or C are the spores. And then what is the name of the structure in which it is found on the leaflets? In other words, we go back again to the name of the structure which are found on the leaflets. So what is the name of the structure? And then it is the spores, and then they are found on the sori. Identify the structure labeled D. Where is D? Here is D. What is D? D is our advantageous roots, or D is the root. It is not the rhizoids. Name two functions of structure D. Where is D? That is D. In other words, they need you to name two functions of the advantageous roots, or of the roots. The first function, we all know, that is to anchor plant firmly in the soil. That is a tick for that. And then it also to absorb water and mineral salts from the soil. So grade 11s, these are free marks that you can not lose. Please make it a point that you grab all the marks. The diagram below shows the evolutionary relationships between plants studied. Now we are given this diagram, and the diagram has the common green algal ancestor, and then which gave rise to the Bryophytes as well as the Pteridophytes, and then there's development of vascular tissues. Now let's check into our questions. Question number 1, give a name for this type of diagram. What do we call this diagram? Remember, we said is a phylogenetic tree, or the cladogram. Which plant division developed first? Which plant division developed first from the common ancestor? It is the Bryophytes. Name the common ancestor of the Bryophytes and Pteridophyte. What is the common ancestor? So these are the marks that, the answers. You are given the answers. You just take the answers and write them on your answer sheets. The common ancestor, the common ancestor of both Bryophytes and Pteridophyte are the green algal ancestor, or the green algae, or the green algal. Yes. Which plant is called the thallus, and why? Which plant is called the thallus and why? Still considering our diagram. Is this a thallus or is that thallus? Which one of the two and why? The one that is called the thallus are the Bryophytes. We all remember that. And why are they called the thallus? It is because they don't have true roots, they don't have true leaves, and they don't have true stems. So that's why they are the thallus. Explain why Pteridophytes can grow taller than Bryophytes. Why can these grow taller than Pteridophytes? I think we've explained that earlier on. It is because they've got the vascular tissues, and then those vascular tissues they give the supportive function. Water, minerals, organic substances, and transported throughout the plant. So meaning that these vascular tissues are giving the supportive function. How so? Because water, minerals, and organic substances are being transported throughout the plants, and then their roots penetrate into soil, so that they can I mean, they are not reliant on the what? On the surface water. So any of these reasons, they make it to grow, they make the pteridophyte to grow taller than the bryophytes. Last question. Name two similarities between pteridophyte and bryophytes. What are the similarities between the two plants? Number one, they both are seedless, and then they both do not produce fruits, and they both do produce spores. In other words, they do produce spores, and then they both need water for what? For fertilization. So these are the similarities between the two plants. Now let's go to our third division. The third division is called Gymnosperm. So let's now quickly do the Gymnosperms. The division Gymnosperms include the cycads, they include the ginkgo biloba, and then they also include the velvet chia, as well as the pine tree. So these are all different types or different divisions of what? Of the Gymnosperms. And then Gymnosperms all produce seeds which are developed into the what? Into the cones. In other words, all the Gymnosperms, Gymnosperm groups, they produce seeds which develop into what? Into cones. Now let's check into the characteristics of what? Of the Gymnosperms. The Gymnosperms, the sporophyte generation is the one that is dominant in the Gymnosperms, and it is the most visible part of the what? Of the plant. And then the Gymnosperms, they also have true roots, true stems, and true leaves. In other words, they are not referred to as thallus plants because they've got all the true root stems and leaves. And then they also have vascular tissues. In other words, they have the xylem as well as phloem. And then the xylem in pine trees do not have vessel elements. In other words, we know that xylems usually have vessel elements, but the xylems which are found in the pine trees lack vessel elements. That is why. And then they only have the tracheates instead of what? Of xylem elements. So that is why the wood of pine trees is softer than what? It is softer than the wood of what? Of the higher plants, because they do not have what? The xylem elements. So the leaves of the pine trees are needle-like and have the they have a cuticle to reduce what? The loss of water through evaporation. In other words, these needle-like leaves, they also have cuticle, and we know by now that the functions of the cuticle is to do what? Is to prevent loss of water. In other words, all these leaves are having what? Are having cuticles. So they are saying that the leaves, the leaves of the pine trees are needle-like. So when we look into these leaves, we can confirm, we can agree that they've got a needle like shape. They are unlike these other these other leaves that we usually see. They are different from the leaves that we usually see, but they are needle-like. That's why they are so many. They are more than the leaves that we can see in other plants. So they are said to be needle-like because they've got that shape of the needle. So these ones are long. They are long leaves. They are long leaves. The other examples here, we also have the needle-like leaves, but these ones are shorter as compared to the previous one that I've just shown you. So they are needle-like, and then at the same time being needle-like, it means that all of these leaves, they've got the cuticle, or they are covered by cuticle. It means that this cuticle is the one that is doing what? Is the one that is preventing loss of water. So so that's why what is happening now, they say that the reduced volume of leaves prevent the reduced volume of leaves or the reduced size of leaves. They prevent what? They prevent the ice crystals from forming on the leaves. Because if the ice crystals are forming on the leaves, it means that our leaves can be damaged. But because of the reduced size or the reduced volume, because of them being small, it does not allow the ice crystals to do what? To form. It does not allow the ice crystals to do what? To form on them. And then in other words, if the ice crystals can be formed or can stay on the leaves, then it means that our leaves can be damaged internally. So the shape of the tree again also stops. Let me remember the pine trees. They've got that pyramid, they've got that pyramid shape, they've got that pyramid shape. So in other words, this shape of the tree, the shape of the tree does not allow the snow to do what? To accumulate on the what? On the tree. In other words, the snow does not accumulate on the what? On the branches of the tree because of that shape. So that's why they are even surviving those snowy conditions. They are surviving the cold conditions because of their structure. So this is the structure of, this is how the pine tree looks like. Can you see? It gives us what? The cone structure. So because of this structure, it does not allow what? The snow to do what? To accumulate on the what? On the branches. So that's why it is enabled to do what? To survive those snow conditions. Now the pine trees have well-developed root systems, so they are having a well-developed root systems which are called the root systems which are called the tap roots. So these are not the advantageous roots, but the type of roots that we are getting from the pine tree is the tap roots. And then the pine trees are not indigenous to what? To South Africa. So if we say that they are not indigenous to South Africa, it means that South Africa is not the natural habitat of what? Of pine trees. Now we know that all the plants which are not naturally grown in the area, they take more of the water as compared to the indigenous plants. So what is happening with the pine trees, because they are not indigenous to South Africa, in other words, they are not naturally, South Africa is not their natural habitat. It means that they are able to do what? To use more water, more available water than what? Than the natural vegetation, because of their extensive what? Root systems. So in other words, their root systems are penetrating even deeper and deeper, so they are able to do what? To take all the available water. That's why they will always be forever what? Forever green, because they take more water as compared to the indigenous natural vegetation. Why? Because they are not indigenous in South Africa. Now let us look into the reproduction now of what? Of Gymnosperms. Gymnosperms, just like the previous divisions, just like the Bryophyte as well as Pteridophyte, they do not produce what? Cones, but they do have male and female cones instant. So this is the first plant that produces or that bears what? That bears the cones, the male cones as well as the female cones. Now they form both male cones and female cones in one plant. The male cones are in groups. They are usually clustered and even smaller than what? Smaller than the female cones. And then they are also the carriers of what? Of pollen grains. However, the female cones are larger and woody. And then what does that mean? It means that they occur singly on the end of the what? Of the branches. I just brought only one example of what? Of a cone. So this is an example of a female cone, and then it will always be bigger than what? Than a male cone. So this is an example of a cone. So what is happening with the cones is that both male cone and female cone, both the cones are developing in one tree. So if they are developing in one tree, we are saying that the pine trees are monoecious. Mono means one. In other words, in one plant we get two cones. We get the male cone as well as the female cone. And if the plant is said to be dioecious, it means that the male cone will develop on what, on the on a different plant, and the female cone will also develop on a different plant. However, all pine trees are monoecious because both male and female cones are developing on the same tree. Now, reproduction in male spores, how does it happen? When a male spores in gymnosperms, where are they developing in males? Where do we get the spores in males in the gymnosperms? The male, the male spores are developing inside the what? The male cones. And then in the male cones, that's where there's a pollen sacs, and then the pollen sacs is the one that is containing what? Is containing the pollen grain, and then the pollen grain is our male spores. And then what is happening now, the pollen sacs are male sporangium, which produce the male spores, or which produce what? The male, the pollen grains. So this is what is happening. This is actually what is happening. So in the male cones, that's where we are getting what? That's where we are getting the pollen sacs. And then the pollen sacs are the ones which are containing what? The pollen grains. And the pollen grains are the male spores. And then the pollen sacs are the male sporangiums, the male sporangia, which produce the male spores, and we said the male spores are the pollen grains. And where are the female spores in gymnosperms developing? They are the female ones are developing inside the female cones, and then inside the female cones, that's where there are ovules, and then the ovule is the one that is containing the female spores, and then the female spore will be carried on the upper surface of the what? Of the scale. So what is happening here? This is a female example of the a female cone. So on the bract here, we've got the bract here. This is the bract, and then we are having what? We are having the bract scale, and then on the bract scale, that's where we are having the ovule. The ovule is developing on the what? On the female, on the seed scale. So this is where we are getting what? The ovule. So it is important to note that fertilization is not dependent on water in regards to the pine trees. Pine trees, water is not essential for what? For reproduction. However, wind is the one that is essential for what? For reproduction. Why? Because we need wind that is going to do what? That is going to blow, or that is going to disperse the what? The seeds, the naked seeds. So the pollen grain is carried by wind from the male. It is carried by wind from the male cone to the female cone. So in other words, it gets now into the, from the male cone, and then it gets into what? Into the female cone. After fertilization, the seed that is containing the embryo is going to be formed. The seed that is containing the embryo is now going to do what? To be formed. And then these seed is now going to develop into what we call the sporophyte. This seed, which is containing the embryo, is going to develop into what? Into a sporophyte generation. And then the seed of the pine are said to be naked. In other words, they are not protected or covered by anything like the seeds that we are getting from the fruits. So they are referred to as the what? As the naked seeds. And then they are the ones which will be exposed on the what? On the female cones. So the seeds are usually the ones which are exposed on the female cones. So they are naked. They are not protected or covered like the seeds we get from the fruits. So this is an example of what, of the seeds of the what, of the gymnosperms. Can you see they are just naked? So they've got the wing-like structures, and then these wing-like structures, they enable them to do what, to be able to fly when they are dispersed by what, by wind. So what is happening when the seeds are ripe, when they are ready now, they will do what, they will fall down out of the cone, and they will be carried by what, by the wind to another what, location. In other words, if we are having let me draw it nicely, if we are having our tree here, or our pine tree, that seeds, after they have been matured in on the female cones, what is going to happen, they will be carried away by what, by wind to another what, to another location. So they will fall down there. So they won't, there's no need for them to fall under the what, under their mother or under the tree. Why? Because there will be competition. Now if they fall here, it means that they will develop, or they will grow near the mother. So there will be competition. In other words, they will both fight for what, fight for the available water. So it's better for them to do what, to be dispersed away from what, away from their mother. So each seed has a wing to help it to do what, to fly. It will fly. And then how so? By means of the wind. And then it is important for the survival of the species that the seeds does not fall under the tree, is what I've just explained, that it is very, very important for them not to fall under the mother. Why? Because when they germinate and then they go under the mother, it means that there will be a shade, number one, which will hamper them to do what, to grow. And again, there will be competition with the mother tree. Competition of what? Competition of water as well as nutrients. So if it grows away from the mother, meaning that it will grow independently. So, and then that's why most of the time we'll see most of the trees lying next to each other in most of the areas, because of the seeds being dispersed away from what? From the mother tree. So what are the commercial use of the pine trees? What are the commercial use of the pine trees? They are very, very commercially important. Now, how are they important? How are they commercially important? Pine trees are cultivated in South Africa in huge plantations. If they are cultivated in South Africa in huge, plantations, you can see how the area they are developing there, or they are growing there, they are very, 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 very many. So they are in huge plantation. So they are used as wood to make papers. We are making papers. We are also making what, furniture out of the woods of what, of the pines. They are also used to flavor. They also produce the nuts, which are called the seed of the pine. So those nuts are used using the seeds of the pine. So these nuts, they are usually used to flavor drinks as well as to make a good pesto. So they are very, very commercial. So you can see the pine nuts there. So these pine nuts are being made out of what, the seeds. So they give us those commercial importances. Now let's look into the first activity. Tabulate the following characteristics of gymnosperms. The first characteristic will be the structure of the dominant generation. The second characteristic, the vascular tissue. The third will be seeds. Do they produce seeds or spores? And then the other one, are they fruit bearing, yes or no? And then are they depending on water for reproduction? So these are all them characteristics that you need to tabulate. I've already provided you with the answer. So let's look into the first characteristics, the structure of dominant generation. The structure is that they've got two root stems and leaves, and then the sporophyte generation is the one that is dominant. Do they have leaves? Yes, they do have leaves. And then which needle shaped. We've seen the leaves which are having the needle shape, and then they also have male cones, and then they also have female cones in larger cones, and then they are also having the stem, and then the stem is the woody part. And then the second characteristic, do they possess vascular tissues? Yes, xylem and phloem are present. Do they have spores or seeds? They produce spores, and then they also produce seeds, and then their seeds are the naked seeds. Are they fruit bearing? No, they do not bear any fruits. Are they depending on water for reproduction? No, they do not need water for reproduction. Rather, they need wind for reproduction. Second question, the diagram below shows the evolutionary relationship between different plants, between different plant groups studied. So this is the evolutionary relationship. So we've got the common ancestor, which is the green algae, and then we've got the Bryophytes, we've got the Pteridophytes, as well as the Gymnosperms. Now the first question says, what is the type of diagram called? So can you see it is not for the first time getting this question, which is asking us the name of the diagram. It means that you need to know that this type of a diagram is called what? A phylogenetic tree. So that is a phylogenetic tree. Which plant group is the least suited for life on land? Which one between 1, 2, and 3, between Bryophytes, Pteridophytes, and Gymnosperm, is least suited for life on Earth? So we've seen that the Bryophytes are the ones which are less suited for life on Earth. So as of the Pteridophyte and Gymnosperms, they grow well on land. Give a reason for your answer. Why are these least suited to live on on land? Give a reason for your answer. Why? Because Bryophytes do not have roots, therefore they obtain water. They obtain water from the soil, and they don't have what? Again, they don't have the vascular tissues to transport that water. And then they need to remain close on the water sources so that they can obtain water. And then again, they need water for what? For fertilization. The fourth question on this diagram, Gymnosperms are more advanced than Bryophytes. The Gymnosperms are more advanced than Bryophytes. State 2 pieces from the diagram that supports this statement. So what are the 2 pieces? Number 1, the Gymnosperms, they've got the vascular tissues, and then they also develop what? The seeds. That's why they are more advanced than the Bryophytes. They develop the vascular tissues, and they also develop what? The seeds. So you don't even have to think of the answer because they said from the diagram. So this is what we got from the diagram, grade 11s. So that takes us to the last part, or to the end of our session. I hope you have enjoyed and then you have learned so much about the plant biodiversity, and you'll be able to answer all questions based on that. Until we meet next time, have a nice day. Bye-bye.